So let me just start by sharing the following. I grew up in Poland during communist times. Very gray. Very gray. Not only because of the weather in the global north, but because of communist times. So anytime I'm in Latin America and I wake up to what we woke up here today, it just really makes my soul sing. And it just, it really makes me think, oh my God, how did I get here? How am I so privileged to be in this beautiful space with beautiful people coming from, very much a gray communist bloc. So I just want to express my appreciation for the invite, for all of you, for all that we're talking about here. And I think that's one of the reasons I really am a big advocate for what we're talking about. So I'm new to this crowd a little bit. There are many people that I do not know and that do not know me. So let me just introduce my institution. I direct a program at Open Society Foundations that is called Advancing Global Drug Policy Reform. And basically our assumption is that drug policies based on prohibition have fueled violence and corruption, often with devastating impacts on health, safety, and well-being of entire communities. The Open Society Foundation supports groups that put forward alternatives. And of course, what Martin described here in detail is that alternative, taking coca out of scheduling. So this is my organization. Now, a little bit about me. I feel like I've been a part of over 30 years of my professional life. I've been a part of the AIDS movement, harm reduction movement, drug policy reform, and now I'm tangentially engaged around psychedelics. And I wanted to make one point, which I'm sorry if it comes out slightly controversial, is that one of the reasons I think that we struggle to get the progress that we need is that we function in silos. And I sat at this global level where I was a part of those movements, and I feel honored and privileged to have had that opportunity. But when I think about harm reduction had to work incredibly hard to get legitimized and accepted by the AIDS movement. And issues of needle exchange programs for people who are opioid users, substitution treatment, all that was needed in terms of public health to make sure that people who were drug using were safe was a real struggle. And they've been successful, and we have a robust harm reduction movement, but no one here is from the harm reduction movement, are they? Okay, bravo, we have one person, right? So harm reduction conference is coming to Bogota in November, in April. I do hope people show up. I hope people show up and will make an effort to get to know each other and enlist each other in their causes, because I think together we're that much stronger. Now, drug policy reform movement, very robust in the United States. DCRIM, one of the flagship goals. Cannabis regulation, one of the flagship goals. Both incredibly important. I can't tell you how many times I have heard from people who are in cannabis movement where at least we're not junkies. Right? This sort of constant division that, cannabis movement is not interested in supporting harm reduction movement and safe consumption rooms because we're not junkies. And then I now engage with psychedelic movements. Again, very impressive, a lot of committed people. And what do I hear there? Well, our drugs are so much better than yours because, it's mind expanding. And it's making the world a better place. And we're not junkies and we're not potheads. Okay, again, if I end my career, something like 5 years from now, and whenever that will be, and we can stop telling each other that I'm better than you are, that would be a really good thing. Because, again, as Martin pointed out, what Vienna is worried about is that if they let coca out of the conventions, what will psychedelic people then have a pathway to psilocybin. Well, so that is why psychedelic people should be fighting with all of us for coca rescheduling. But are they? No, because their drug is better than someone else's drug. I don't want to call coca leaf a drug, but you get my point. So can we please come together around one table and understand that what we are against is not our individual interest. We are against a huge international regime that, again, Martin has described quite well. We had a conversation with a colleague that will be speaking tomorrow on environmental issues and drug policy. And one thing that she said beautifully to me yesterday, which I very much agree, is that the greatest impact of prohibition and the international drugs regime is stigma. And we have bought into that stigma through this process of, my psilocybin is better than your pot. So that's that's just the first observation from where I come from to your table. And thank you for welcoming me. So it is this is what we should be fighting, right? And this is what we should be really, really competent in and understand. It is the international drug conventions. Because this is what got us to where we are today. And it is really important that people that will be advocating for psilocybin removal actually are with us when we talk about coca. One sort of harrowing statement I heard from psychedelic folks not long ago is when they spoke on behalf of Ibogaine. Again, fantastic plant. It's great. It's great that this possibility exists. Their way to advocate on behalf of Iboga and Ibogaine is to speak against methadone and buprenorphine. Because why would you keep, people on those pharmaceuticals where you could have a plant? I sit there, think about hundreds of thousands of drug users who got infected with HIV and died, and people who fought for harm reduction and methadone and buprenorphine. And it's hard for me not to want to scream. How could we set agendas forward by diminishing others? And unfortunately, I see that a lot. And that is the advocacy point for Iboga and Ibogaine. Please don't get onto that bandwagon. So this is what we should be fighting. And one way to engage is join the campaign that Martin has described so eloquently. So it's no accident that US is such a huge driver of the drug war. We know this, we heard that from Wade yesterday. And I think it's really important to grasp that we, right here in this beautiful space, with those fantastic goals, are a part of a much larger war on drugs. I don't even want to say collateral. I don't know that is the right word. But this is what happens in a war in the world because of the conventions and because of US commitment to the war on drugs. Some of you might know, some of you might not, that during previous administration in the Philippines, President Duterte ignited a war on drugs that has murdered thousands and thousands of people. Extrajudicial killings. I think the data is still not clear, somewhere between 12,000 to 25,000 people, right? Murdered on the streets, in their homes, in front of their families. This is what war on drugs does. We are a part of that ecosystem. And so acknowledging and understanding how violent and terrible it is, I think it's our responsibility as well as we advocate for coca to recognize the suffering of people elsewhere. This photo is well known. I'm sure those photos are well known to all of you, right? This is US funded. in the beginning, then picked up by Colombia, aerial eradication in Colombia. That is, of course, another expression of the conventions, another expression of the war on drugs. But not only here in Latin America. This is South Africa. They also contended with aerial eradication of cannabis. Again, funded by international organizations, including and international governments. Again, when we talk about the impact of glyphosate and what that does to communities, it's not only here, it also happens elsewhere. And I think it's really important that we understand it and that in solidarity with others, we actually see the whole picture and speak on behalf of the whole picture. Another issue that you guys know quite well, what happened, one other impact of war on drugs, whether in Latin America or elsewhere, the hundreds of thousands of people in prison. Here in Latin America, quite worrisome. I mean, I don't want to say that well-being of women is more important than well-meaning of men, but the fact that women, incarceration rates of women are growing is quite troubling, and it will not be a surprise to anyone that 87% of people in prison are primary caregivers, single moms, people who are economically destitute. Another, in my view, you might disagree, another direct impact of prohibition and the war on drugs is the fentanyl crisis in the US. And let me talk about this for a second. I have seen in Central Asia, 25 years ago, situations where I would walk in, people would offer me opium tea. They were not exactly opium dens, but they were sort of opium, maybe tea houses. They were, as many of you will know, also very present in many Asian countries. And then the US engaged and started funding anti-drug efforts. Those opium sort of tea parlors disappeared immediately. People who were who were indeed dependent on opium switched into injection because they still needed their drug. And from tea, right, the root administration was not smoking because it's visible, right, when you have law enforcement going after you or people with Nactivizers and all of that military equipment brought in by the US are chasing sort of drugs economy, then the most efficient way to administer opium or heroin would have been injection. So within 2 years, and I've seen it with my own eyes, I've seen the shift from relatively harmless opium use, to injection and HIV that followed. The reality is that as prohibition and as law enforcement goes up, the risk that people are willing to take and the risk that people are exposed to also goes up. And so the fact that we have this terrible fentanyl crisis in the US is a direct result of increasing law enforcement, of the fact that, and basically prohibition. When you look at countries that were willing to adopt safe consumption rooms, heroin maintenance programs in Europe, right, have a sensible, thoughtful public health intervention for people who are opioid dependent, that's not what happens. Fentanyl is not winning. Let's hope that they continue those interventions and expand those interventions and that Europe will, in some sense, stay away from fentanyl market. But this is no accident, right? It happens, it's a direct outcome of policies that we engage in. And again, stigmatizing opioid users, right? Stigmatizing junkies gets us here, right? And not recognizing humanity of people who use drugs for multiple range of issues. And it may be, cannabis for some, and for some, whatever reasons, opioids. So our engagement with coca leaf really stems from engagement in drug policy efforts. This is a publication that we've put out in sort of taking stock of what's possible in Colombia, and I encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't seen it. And so let's now go to Martin and the WHO review. I think one thing that I would really encourage all of us to think about is how to think about WHO review beyond just toxicology. I mean, all of the experience, all of the knowledge that you have in this room needs to find its way into the WHO discourse. So we look at coca leaf for all of its benefits, right? Not simply, thank you, not simply the alkaloid itself. So in its global strategy on traditional medicines, WHO itself underlines the value and diversity of indigenous peoples' cultures and local communities, as well as their holistic traditional knowledge. This strategy promotes the integration of those practices into national health system, always based on scientific evidence, stressing that traditional medicine is an important and often underestimated part of health services. So this is their speak. This is WHO speak that I think we need to amplify, and we need to bring back to them in the discussions of coca. It also promotes policies that guarantee the safety and efficacy of those practices while respecting the natural and cultural resources of indigenous peoples and campesinos. Again, we would not be bringing anything to WHO, anything that's foreign to them. This is WHO language, and I think we should repeatedly make sure that it is a part of discussions. And then there's also the rights of indigenous people. United Nations Declaration of Rights reinforces the relevance of protecting and promoting the traditional health practices of these communities. It highlights their cultural heritage as key contribution to global well-being. So what does that mean in practice? So the critical review, pointed out by Martin and repeated a bit, must be approached from a broad perspective, not only address chemical, pharmacological aspects, but also social, cultural, and human rights dimensions. Should not be resolved solely for the voting process of the CND, and it's crucial to validate the traditional knowledge and practices. Those two photos are from Cauca, Colombia, where I had an opportunity to make some coca chocolate. And also to see the dyeing process of silk with coca. So again, I think it's really, really important that we all commit ourselves by the time we leave here to find ways to input into the system, using full range of our knowledge, from culinary to fabric producing to nutritional value and so on. So I wanted to just share an example with you that may be inspiring or not. China in 2015 wanted to do the opposite thing of what we're trying to do. It wanted to schedule ketamine. It basically brought a request to the CND that they would like to schedule ketamine because, according to an INCB report, ketamine is most widely abused non-controlled substance in Asia. And that it created political and health problems. Now, here's what the World Health Organization says. Ketamine should not be controlled. It highlighted the importance ketamine plays in the field of anesthesia, particularly in developing countries. In developing countries, ketamine is often the only analgesic. So just think about what that would mean and how it would reduce the availability. Ketamine could lead to ketamine scheduling could lead to public health crisis because it would limit access to essential and emergency surgery in countries where no affordable alternatives are available. And so another issue that I think all of us in the drug policy field broadly should understand is that because of international drug control regime, the developing world already suffers tremendously from shortage of opioid-based medicine. 83% of the world's population have little or no access to them. So again, in a list of grievances against international system, that should certainly be one, particularly in the global south. And why do I raise this here? Because the response of civil society was actually incredibly swift. And to me, it was an example of how we can come together and push back incredibly effectively. So these are some of the NGOs that actually engaged very actively. TNI, Martin will well remember this, IDPC, many others who basically said that that's not okay. Right, and pushed back pretty hard and actually helped to mobilize others. And I'm going to just show you the list of the others that engaged. And that list is quite impressive. Look, Oxfam, Save the Children, European League Against Pain. All of those groups wrote letters, engaged, made phone calls. The list goes on. African Palliative Care Association, Indian Society of Study of Pain, South African Veterinary Association, American Medical Women's Association, Surgical Society of Ethiopia, a Global Health Program for the University of Toronto. This is what we need, right? We need that level of engagement on behalf of COCA. And all of us need to get on the phone, get on email, and start mobilizing people in support of the descheduling of COCA, because that's what it will take. Not a little group of us talking to each other. This is what it will take. So again, I am a strong believer, no good drugs and bad drugs, right? What really matters is this. Because if you look at heroin maintenance programs in Switzerland, people who are heroin dependent function beautifully. In their families, in their communities, they go to work because they have the privilege to live in a system that does not stigmatize their use. And at some point they make a decision. Okay, it's time to stop. That is not what we're seeing in the US with its fentanyl crisis. And that is not how we think about drugs. This is I don't want to use the word enemy, but I'll use the word enemy. This is what we should be focusing on. Many people mobilize around many, many issues. Let's be a part of those movements. Let's invite them to ours. So, in a couple of years, in 5 years, someone can stand and make this presentation and make a long list of advocates that mobilized on behalf of COCA Leave. Thank you.